The puppy fell in love with the bear cub. Now, the bear cub had no idea how to escape. The morning air hung crisp and cool over the Blue Ridge Mountains, dew clinging to pine needles as sunlight filtered through the dense canopy. In a mossy den nestled between ancient oak roots, Max curled against his mother's warm brown fur. The bear cub's world consisted of simple pleasures: the sweet taste of blackberries, the gentle rumble of his mother's protective growl, and the endless playground of forests that stretched beyond their home. "Stay close," his mother would huff, her breath warm against his ear as they wandered through thickets of mountain laurel. Max learned quickly under her patient guidance which berries to eat, which streams held the fattest fish, and most importantly, which scents meant danger. Humans were to be avoided at all costs. Their strange upright gait and harsh unnatural smells signaled nothing but trouble. For the first year of Max's life, the rhythm of the wilderness was all he knew. He watched the seasons change from the vibrant greens of spring to the golden hues of autumn. His mother's watchful eyes kept him safe as he grew stronger, more curious, and more confident in exploring the boundaries of their territory, until that terrible morning when everything changed. The mechanical roar came without warning, a logging truck careening around a bend in the mountain road, its brakes failing catastrophically as it barreled through the guardrail. Max and his mother had been foraging near the edge of the forest when the massive vehicle crashed through the underbrush. His mother pushed him roughly aside with a powerful swat of her paw, sending him tumbling into a dense thicket of rhododendron. The sound was deafening, metal crushing against wood, glass shattering, and beneath it all, a single agonized bellow that Max would never forget. When the forest finally fell silent again, save for the hissing of the truck's ruined engine, Max crawled from his hiding place. His mother lay motionless beneath the twisted wreckage, her powerful body unnaturally still. "Mama." Max nudged her with his snout, pawing anxiously at her shoulder. She didn't respond. Even as the scent of humans drew closer, shouts and flashlights cutting through the trees, Max refused to leave her side. Only when the voices were nearly upon him did his survival instinct finally kick in, driving him deeper into the forest, alone for the first time in his young life. The days that followed passed in a blur of confusion and hunger. Without his mother to guide him, Max struggled to find enough food. He knew the basics of foraging but lacked the experience to sustain himself properly. Autumn was giving way to winter, and the forest's bounty was diminishing rapidly. A desperate attempt to catch fish in a stream resulted in a painful gash on his foreleg from a sharp rock. The wound festered, further weakening the young bear. As the first snow dusted the mountains, Max grew increasingly desperate. His ribs protruded beneath his once glossy coat, and the infected wound made each step agony. When a fierce November storm swept through the mountains, driving rain and sleet before it, Max found himself following an unfamiliar scent, something warm and enticing that promised relief from his misery. The scent led him to the edge of the forest, where trees gave way to open spaces dotted with strange square structures. Lights glowed from within these human dwellings, and despite everything his mother had taught him about avoiding people, Max was too hungry, too cold, and too alone to resist. The Thompson house sat at the very edge of the small mountain town, its back porch facing the wilderness. Martha Thompson had just finished preparing a hearty venison stew, its rich aroma wafting through the crack beneath the back door, the very scent that had drawn Max from the safety of the trees. The rain was coming down in sheets when Martha heard faint scratching at the door. "George," she called to her husband, who was settled in his recliner watching the evening news. "I think one of the dogs wants in." "Can't be," George replied without looking up. Both of them are asleep right here by the fire. Martha frowned, setting aside her dish towel and approaching the back door cautiously. The scratching came again, weaker this time, followed by a soft whimpering sound that tugged at her heart. "There's something out there, George," she insisted. "Some poor creature caught in this awful storm." George sighed, heaving himself from his chair. "Probably just a raccoon after the garbage. I'll scare it off." When Martha opened the door, thunder cracked overhead, momentarily illuminating the small but draggled figure collapsed on their welcome mat. Not a raccoon, a bear cub so thin and pitiful that Martha's hand flew to her mouth in shock. "George," she whispered, "look." George Thompson had lived in these mountains his entire 65 years. He'd encountered bears before, usually giving them a wide berth or making noise to scare them away, but he'd never seen one like this. Barely more than a baby, soaked to the skin with an angry red wound visible on its leg. The cub's eyes were glazed with fever and fear, its breath coming in shallow pants. "We should call animal control," George said immediately, though his voice lacked conviction. Martha shook her head firmly. "They won't come out in this odor, and by morning," she didn't finish the thought. "Call Dr. Evans instead. He'll know what to do." James Evans was the town's veterinarian, a gruff but kind-hearted man in his 70s who treated everything from household pets to injured wildlife. Despite the late hour and raging storm, he answered on the third ring. "A bear cub," he repeated after George explained the situation. "Injured and alone. Poor thing's mother must be gone, they don't separate at that age otherwise." There was a long pause before the veterinarian said, "Keep it warm and quiet. I'll be there as soon as I can. And George, don't call Fish and Wildlife just yet, let me see the little fella first." While they waited for Dr. Evans to arrive, Martha and George prepared the laundry room as a temporary shelter. They lined the floor with old blankets and placed a bowl of water in the corner. With extreme caution, George lifted the nearly unconscious cub, surprised at how light it felt, and carried it inside. From the living room, Buddy, their 10-year-old golden retriever, watched with suspicious eyes, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Charlie, the beagle, erupted into a frenzy of barking, darting around George's legs as he carried the strange intruder through the house. "Hush now," Martha scolded, shooing both dogs away. "Can't you see he's hurt?" Max barely registered the movement or the new surroundings. The warmth of the house was so overwhelming after weeks in the cold that he could do little more than collapse onto the soft blankets. The strange sense of humans and dogs registered dimly as a threat, but he was too weak to respond. Dr. Evans arrived 45 minutes later, carrying his medical bag and wearing a grim expression. "Let's see what we've got," he said, kneeling beside the cub. His examination was gentle but thorough, his weathered hands moving with practiced skill. "Deficiency male, about a year old," he reported. "Severely malnourished, dehydrated, and this leg wound is badly infected. He needs antibiotics, fluids, and food, gradually. Mind you, too much at once could kill him. Can you help him?" Martha asked, her face etched with concern. Dr. Evans nodded slowly. "I can treat the immediate problems, but Martha, George, this is a wild animal, a predator. Even a cub this size could be dangerous. When he starts feeling better, he has nowhere to go." Martha said softly, "Not in this condition, not in this weather. The rehabilitation center over in Asheville might take him," Dr. Evans suggested, "but they're probably full up this time of year, and with this storm." "We'll keep him," Martha declared with a firmness that brooked no argument. "Just until he's well enough to survive on his own." George and Dr. Evans exchanged looks, both knowing it wasn't that simple but neither willing to argue with Martha when her mind was made up. A few days, Dr. Evans conceded, preparing an injection of antibiotics. Then we'll need to make more permanent arrangements. After Dr. Evans left, having administered treatment and leaving behind medications and detailed instructions, Martha sat on a stool in the laundry room watching the sleeping cub. George stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. "We're calling him Max," Martha announced. "We're not naming him," George protested weakly. "He's not a pet, Martha." But Martha wasn't listening. She was watching the gentle rise and fall of the cub's chest, thinking of the cruel twist of fate that had brought this wild creature to their doorstep. "Max," she repeated softly, "it suits him." For 3 days, Max remained in a state of semi-consciousness, rousing only when Martha coaxed small amounts of diluted honey water into his mouth or applied the antibiotic ointment to his wound. On the 4th morning, Martha entered the laundry room to find him awake, pressed into the corner farthest from the door, dark eyes tracking her every movement. "Well, good morning," she said softly, setting down a small bowl of thinned oatmeal. "You're looking better today." Max didn't move, his body was rigid with fear. When Martha took a step closer, he emitted a low whine that stopped her in her tracks. "It's all right," she soothed. "No one's going to hurt you here." But Max didn't understand her words, only that he was trapped in a strange place surrounded by unfamiliar scents and sounds. The only thing keeping him from panicking completely was his physical weakness and the fact that these humans had not yet harmed him. Charlie complicated matters significantly. The beagle seemed to consider it his personal mission to alert the household to Max's continued presence, barking frantically whenever he caught the bear's scent. Buddy was more reserved but no less wary, positioning himself between Martha and the laundry room door whenever she went to check on their unusual guest. "He's just a baby," Martha chided the dogs. "A scared, hurt baby who needs our help." Max ate only when no one was watching. The food disappeared between Martha's visits to the laundry room. He drank the water she provided and used the puppy training pads they'd placed in one corner with surprising neatness, but he remained withdrawn, huddling in his corner and flinching at every sound. Dr. Evans visited every few days, pleased with Max's physical recovery but concerned about his behavior. "He's traumatized," the veterinarian explained. "Lost his mother, nearly starved, then suddenly thrust into a human environment. It's a lot for a young bear to process." "Will he ever trust us?" Martha asked. Dr. Evans shrugged. "Hard to say. Bears are intelligent, but they're not dogs. They don't seek human approval or companionship by nature." As Max's health improved, the question of what would happen next loomed larger. The rehabilitation center in Asheville was still at capacity, and the local wildlife officials had made it clear that a bear who had entered a human dwelling was considered a potential problem animal. They might not release him back to the wild, Dr. Evans warned during one visit. Sometimes he trailed off, but Martha understood the implication. "He stays until we find a better option," she said firmly. Weeks passed, and Max grew stronger. His wound healed, leaving only a slight scar on his forehead. His coat regained its glossy sheen, and he filled out, no longer the skeletal creature who had collapsed on their doorstep. Yet emotionally, he remained distant, observing the household from his sanctuary in the laundry room, accepting their care but never seeking interaction. Then came the day when George accidentally left the laundry room door ajar. Martha was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard Charlie's frantic barking. she turned to find Max standing in the doorway of the laundry room, his dark eyes taking in the wider space of the house. Charlie danced around him, barking hysterically, while Buddy stood rigid, a low growl emanating from his throat. "George," Martha called, her voice tight with alarm. Max didn't charge or flee. Instead, he simply walked slowly and deliberately into the living room and sat down on the rug before the fireplace. His posture wasn't threatening. If anything, he seemed smaller somehow, making himself as unobtrusive as possible in this new territory. Charlie's barking reached a fever pitch, but Max didn't react. He simply sat, gaze fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace as though the beagle's noise was nothing more than the rustle of leaves in the forest. Gradually, Charlie's barking subsided, replaced by confused whimpers. Buddy maintained his vigilance, but his growling stopped. The three animals reached an uneasy détente, the dogs wearily accepting Max's presence, Max tolerating theirs. "Well, I'll be damned," George murmured, watching from the hallway. "He's not what I expected." From that day forward, Max was granted limited freedom within the house. He returned to the laundry room to sleep and eat, but during quiet afternoons, he would emerge to sit by the fireplace, always in the same spot, always with the same calm demeanor. Martha noticed that he seemed to be observing them, learning their routines, studying their interactions with each other and with her. He never approached them directly, never sought affection or attention, but his fear was gradually being replaced by curiosity. This delicate balance was upended entirely when Jackson arrived. The Thompsons' daughter, Emily, had been concerned about her parents living so remotely as they aged. When she found a Labrador Retriever puppy in need of a home, just 8 weeks old and already showing signs of boundless energy, she decided he would make the perfect addition to her parents' household. "His name is Jackson," Emily announced, setting the squirming puppy on the living room floor. "He'll keep you young, Dad." George eyed the puppy skeptically. "We've already got 2 dogs, Emily." And he lowered his voice, the other situation. Emily had been briefed about Max over the phone but seemed unconcerned. "Dogs and bears coexist in the wild all the time," she said with the confidence of someone who had never actually tested this theory. Jackson, oblivious to any potential danger, zoomed around the living room on oversized paws, investigating every corner, every scent. When he discovered Max's blanket by the fireplace, he pounced on it gleefully, rolling in the unfamiliar smell. "Jackson, no." Martha moved to intercept the puppy just as Max emerged from the laundry room for his afternoon visit to the fireplace. The bear cub, now nearly twice the size he'd been upon arrival, froze in the doorway. The puppy, noticing him for the first time, stopped his antics and stared, head tilted in confusion. Everyone held their breath. Charlie and Buddy had retreated to opposite corners of the room, watching the interaction with visible anxiety. Even Emily, who had been so cavalier about the situation, took an instinctive step back. Jackson broke the tension by doing precisely what puppies do best, assuming that any new creature must be a potential playmate. He dropped into a play bow, rear end wiggling enthusiastically, and yipped an invitation. Max regarded the puppy with what could only be described as bewilderment. When Jackson bounded toward him, Max retreated hastily to the laundry room, the door still open behind him. "Well," George said after a moment, "that could have gone worse." Over the next few days, a strange dynamic developed. Jackson, undeterred by Max's rejection, made it his mission to win over the reclusive bear. He brought his toys one by one to the laundry room door, presenting them like offerings. He carried kibble from his own bowl, dropping it just inside Max's territory. Once, Martha even caught him dragging a carrot stolen from the kitchen counter toward the laundry room. Max's response was consistent, cold indifference. He would wait until Jackson left before pushing the offerings aside with his paw. He avoided the common areas of the house when the puppy was active, emerging only during Jackson's nap times or after he'd been put in his crate for the night. "He's scared of a puppy," George observed one evening. "A bear scared of a puppy?" Martha shook her head. "Not scared, overwhelmed. Jackson doesn't understand boundaries." Indeed, the Labrador puppy seemed physically incapable of taking a hint. Where Buddy and Charlie had learned to give Max a wide berth, Jackson saw the bear's aloofness as a challenge. His attempts at friendship grew increasingly elaborate and, from a human perspective, endearing. Max, however, remained unmoved. His world had been shattered once, he wasn't about to risk attachment again. The turning point came unexpectedly, as such moments often do. The Thompsons had converted their front entry into a mudroom, with a heavy wooden coat rack standing against one wall. On a rainy afternoon, Jackson, now 12 weeks old and still growing into his oversized paws, was chasing a ball that had rolled beneath the rack. In his enthusiasm, he knocked the structure off balance. It teetered precariously before crashing down, pinning the puppy beneath a tangle of coats, scarves, and solid oak. Jackson's yelp of pain and fear brought everyone running. The puppy was trapped, the weight of the rack pressing down on his hindquarters. He whimpered pitifully, unable to free himself. "George, lift it up," Martha cried, reaching for the puppy. George strained against the weight of the rack, but the awkward angle made it difficult to get proper leverage. "I can't get a good grip," he grunted. No one noticed Max until he was already there, pushing past Martha with surprising gentleness. The bear cub approached the fallen rack and, without hesitation, rose up on his hind legs, bracing his front paws against the wood. He pushed with a strength that belied his youth. The rack lifted enough for Martha to pull Jackson free. The puppy scrambled into her arms, trembling but apparently uninjured. Max lowered himself back to all fours and, task completed, began to retreat to his sanctuary. But Jackson wriggled free from Martha's grasp, limping slightly as he followed the bear, whining softly. To everyone's surprise, Max paused. He turned back, regarding the puppy with what seemed like concern. Jackson approached cautiously, his usual exuberance tempered by his recent fright. He stretched his neck forward, sniffing at Max's muzzle. Max remained still, allowing the contact. After a moment, he lowered his head and gave Jackson a single gentle nudge with his nose before continuing to the laundry room. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but something fundamental had shifted that evening. When Martha checked on Max before bed, she found Jackson curled up just outside the laundry room door, as close to Max as the bear would allow. "Look at that," she whispered to George. "He's not giving up." Over the following weeks, the distance between bear and puppy gradually diminished. Max began spending more time in the common areas of the house, tolerating Jackson's presence with increasing patience. For his part, Jackson seemed to intuitively understand that he needed to temper his enthusiasm around his ursine companion. The first time they actually played together, Martha nearly dropped her coffee mug in shock. It was a subdued version of play, Max batting a ball gently toward Jackson, the puppy returning it with exaggerated care, but it was unmistakably interaction. "Never thought I'd see the day," George remarked, watching the unlikely pair from his recliner. By the time winter gave way to spring, Max and Jackson were inseparable. They napped together on the rug before the fireplace, Max inside, closest to the warmth, Jackson pressed against his side. They shared meals, with Max showing surprising delicacy as he took treats from Martha's hand. Even Buddy and Charlie had adjusted to the bear's presence, forming a strange but functional pack hierarchy within the household. Dr. Evans continued his regular visits, monitoring Max's development with professional interest and personal affection. "He's growing well," the veterinarian noted during a checkup. "Too well, perhaps, for a house pet." Indeed, Max was no longer the small cub who had arrived on their doorstep at 18 months old. He weighed over 100 pounds and was still growing. His shoulders were broadening, his frame developing the powerful musculature of an adult black bear. "We always knew this was temporary," Martha said, stroking Max's head as he submitted to Dr. Evans' examination. "But where will he go? He's not fully wild anymore." The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered but increasingly urgent. As spring bloomed into summer, Max began showing signs of restlessness. He would stand at the back door, nose pressed against the glass, watching the forest beyond the yard with visible longing. His appetite changed. The dog kibble and cooked meat that had satisfied him all winter now seemed insufficient. "He's hearing the call of the wild," Dr. Evans explained when Martha described the behavior. "It's instinct. Bears his age would normally be establishing their own territories now." Martha nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. "So it's time." Dr. Evans placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I've been in touch with a wildlife sanctuary in Tennessee. They have a large forested enclosure where bears like Max, too habituated to humans for full release but still fundamentally wild, can live out their lives. He'd have space, natural food sources, even the company of other bears." When George asked, his gruff voice betraying his own attachment, "They can take him next week?" Dr. Evans replied, "I'll handle the transportation myself." The days that followed were bittersweet. Martha found herself taking countless photographs of Max lounging in the sunbeam by the window, sharing a nap with Jackson, accepting an apple slice from George's weathered hand. Every moment felt precious, tinged with the knowledge of imminent separation. Jackson seemed to sense the impending change. The puppy, now nearly 9 months old and considerably more mature, stayed especially close to Max, as though trying to memorize his scent, his presence, his friendship. On the morning of Max's departure, Dr. Evans arrived with a large transport crate and a sedative to make the journey less stressful. Martha had prepared a package of Max's favorite treats in a blanket that smelled of home. "He'll be all right," Dr. Evans assured her as George helped load the drowsy bear into the vehicle. "Bears are adaptable. He'll adjust." Jackson watched the proceedings with uncharacteristic stillness, sitting at attention by the front door. When Max was settled in the crate, Martha knelt beside the Labrador. "Say goodbye to your friend," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. Jackson approached the vehicle, rising on his hind legs to peer through the mesh of the crate. Max, fighting the effects of the sedative, pressed his nose against the barrier. For a long moment, dog and bear regarded each other in silence. Then Max made a soft huffing sound, the closest thing to affection a bear could express. Jackson's tail wagged once, slowly, before he dropped back to all fours and stepped away from the vehicle. As Dr. Evans drove away, Max looked back through the rear window. His dark eyes, once filled with fear and distrust, now held something like understanding, perhaps even gratitude. Jackson stood in the driveway, watching until the vehicle disappeared around the bend, his usual exuberance subdued by the weight of farewell. In the years that followed, the Thompsons received regular updates from the sanctuary. Max had integrated well. They were told he enjoyed foraging in the wooded enclosure, fishing in the artificial stream, and had even formed a cautious friendship with a female bear rescued from a roadside zoo. He remembers how to be a bear, the sanctuary director wrote in one email, but there's something different about him. A gentleness, an understanding of boundaries. Your Max is special. On quiet evenings, George would often recount the story to visitors. The tale of the orphaned bear cub and the puppy who refused to give up on friendship. Jackson, now a dignified adult dog, would listen from his place by the fire, ears perking up at the mention of Max's name. People think love is a bone similarity, George would say, his voice soft with memory, but sometimes it's about seeing past the differences to the heart underneath. Max and Jackson taught us that. Martha would smile, remembering the frightened cub who became a gentle giant and the persistent puppy who showed him how to trust again. Their unlikely friendship had transformed her understanding of what it meant to heal, how sometimes the most wounded souls become the most compassionate protectors, and how love can bridge even the widest divides of species and experience. In the sanctuary, beneath the same moon that shone over the Thompson house, Max would sometimes lift his head from sleep, remembering the warmth of a fireplace and the unflagging devotion of a foolish, wonderful puppy who had seen not a predator but a friend in need of love. And in that memory, both bear and dog found a peace that transcended the boundaries of their separate worlds, a testament to the healing power of connection, the strength of gentleness, and the unexpected ways that broken hearts learn to beat again. Puppy fell in love with bear cub. Now bear cub has no idea how to escape.